Who are the Denver Broncos running back with your interior starting offensive line? We'll tell you why they should make a change at one position here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every single day for all your Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more every single day all year long. Locked On Broncos is the place to be. So thank you so much to all the everydayers in Broncos Country. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day, however you choose to do so. I'm Cody Roark, credentialed Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. And here's what you can have on today's episode of the show. Broncos Country will wrap up today's show by talking about Denver making another coaching change, the Broncos firing inside linebacker coach Greg Manusky. We'll talk about the impact of that. But we're also going to focus on the offensive line. We'll talk about whether or not the center position should be upgraded here for the Broncos in the offseason. And we're going to kick things off by highlighting the impact that Broncos guard play was in 2024 with Quinn Miners and Ben Powers. You're going to get that here on today's episode of the show, which is brought to you by our friends over there, Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Sayre, the offensive line really has put together as much as it is. A lot of their key pieces are locked in for the long term at this point, with the exception of a couple of positions. But let's focus on the interior O-line here. We looked at the offensive tackle position yesterday, specifically looking at the guard play here. Ben Powers, Quinn Miners, left guard, right guard. In 2024, those two guys played relatively well, and Quinn Miners obviously earned himself an in-season contract extension. Do you even look at making any changes to the interior O-line? I feel like it was pretty rock solid for a large part of the season.
I do too. I just don't understand why you would maybe make a big move at guard if you're the Denver Broncos right now. Not necessary given where the team is at in its current development phase of just being built overall. Like, look, there might come a time where the Broncos are so loaded on the roster that you can look back and say, okay, do we want to maybe kind of make a move here? I mean, this position was pretty good this year, but we might have the ability to, think forward in terms of the NFL draft. Like, a lot of teams will draft interior offensive linemen or offensive tackles a year or two before they need to. I just don't know if the Broncos are in that spot right now, Cody. Now, when it comes to the center position, might be a different story because obviously, although we got an all-pro year out of Quinn Miners, we got Ben Powers continuing to play consistent football at the left guard position. I think the center position left a little bit to be desired, honestly. I mean, Luke Wattenberg missed some time. It was his first year as a full-time starter, so we have to kind of give that caveat there. But at the same time, like, how many times did you and I talk about this? Weirdly saw the snap from the center in the shotgun in particular, kind of drifting back to Bo Nix, off target a little bit, maybe a little bit more of a soft toss than a direct snap. I mean, just kind of weird stuff that I noticed all throughout the season at center. And does he get enough push in the run game? Of course, we saw Alex Forsyth out there as well. He played pretty solid when he was given the opportunity. So, I mean, you look at this interior offensive line as a whole. I'm not necessarily the foremost expert on interior line play, but you can't help but wonder if the Broncos might upgrade one of these spots this year.
No, and spot on there too. And if I have to look at, you're looking at guard, center, guard. If there's any position I feel like Denver maybe looks at either bringing in competition or upgrading it, in my opinion, I agree with you. It's got to be the center position. I know our good friend Patrick Chiotti is definitely what was he doing all season long on Twitter? It was something like Watten Watch or something like that. In terms
something
of
like that, yeah.
There was just some moments where the offensive line struggled at the center position from time to time. Now, obviously, when Wattenberg was in, you look at Wattenberg, he's a bigger guy than Alex Forsyth. He's got a little more strength and power to him, but it seemed like the Broncos' run game was better when Alex Forsyth was in. And look, Forsyth, not the physically strongest guy there, I think, in comparison to Wattenberg. I don't know what their lifting numbers are, but when you look at their body types, it's like, all right, you can see maybe Luke Wattenberg is probably stronger. But Forsyth, I think Forsyth is one of the more technically sound, high football IQ guys in the sense of even if he lacks something from the physical aspect, He understands angles. He understands how to pin and seal guys. And I think that's why we saw the Broncos offense have some success. And also, I don't recall seeing when Alex Forsyth was in at center. Granted, he's played with Bo Nix before dating back at Oregon, but you didn't see any instances where there were any low snaps or there were snaps. I know for Wattenberg, there were a few evident examples where Bo Nix is having to turn to adjust to catch a snap either to his left side, to his right side, and then that impacts something for Bo Nix like footwork on a drop back, right? Like those were some things that we saw. Now, in my opinion, look, you still have Luke Wattenberg under contract here. I think you bring Luke back, and we're going to dive deeper into this position, but I think you have to at least bring some competition in there and see if Alex Forsyth can win that job this year or, can hold them off, or is there somebody else out there? I don't know if that's going to be the case here, but I definitely felt like, because you and I highlighted the offensive tackle position in yesterday's show, I didn't come away like, concerned about offensive tackle. I felt like you and I were like, hey, they answered their biggest questions. You have security at the tackle position right now. You have some veteran options. You have some developmental options behind them that are pretty solid. Here at this spot here, you got Quinn Miners locked in. You got Ben Powers here on a long-term deal. I'm not worried about this position, but center is the one position I'm not saying I'm worried about. I would say that I'm a little skeptical about in terms of, okay, is it sustainable with the way that it is going? And we also talk so much about it as well when we talk about the run game struggles. How much of it is also scheme related as well?
Yeah, and you think about this team in the depth department as well, Cody. I mean, they're not exactly running huge depth at this. I mean, not every team in the NFL is going to have great depth on the offensive line at every position, but it kind of felt like the Broncos had to do a little bit more shuffling than was expected when you had some injuries there. When Wattenberg missed time, obviously you slide Forsyth in, he's a natural true center. But then what happens when Quinn Miners has to miss time, or if Ben Powers has to go out for a bit? I mean, who slides into those spots? That's another area that I think we saw maybe the Broncos had to kind of MacGyver some stuff. We saw Alex Palczewski, who we talked about. He got some run at right guard. But I don't know if that's maybe an area where you feel like, hey, if we go upgrade center, now we've got somebody like Wattenberg who could kind of give us depth at both guard and center, and then Forsyth who gives you depth at center as well. And I just can't help but feel like that's maybe the best course of action. Now, the what we'll get into, I'm sure, here is how much you prioritize that because of everything else that you need. Like, do you feel like that was the result? Or the cause, with the effect being the running game struggling a little bit? Do you feel like that was the thing? Because if that's the case, then you really put that higher on the list of offseason needs to say, hey, we need to change at center. But when you go back and you watch this season, I can't help but feel like the center spot was that weak link on the offensive line throughout the course of the year.
And the frustrating part about it being the offseason, and maybe we find this out at the NFL Scouting Combine, because that's the next time we're going to hear from George Payton and Sean Payton is in Indianapolis when they break out into those pods there. And the question is like, where is it scheme related? I don't know if Sean will ever answer that question for us, because then Sean is the type of coach, and understandably so. I wouldn't do the same thing if I was a coach, but maybe revealing like, hey, we have a weakness. Teams are going to take note of that, and they're going to do whatever they can to exploit that. But then that's where you as a coach, you have to kind of sit there and say, you know what, if this is our weakness, if we're not the only ones seeing this, other teams who have really good scouts, really good coaches that are also doing the same evaluations of the opponent, they also know this. So it's on the coaching staff to be able to make the necessary adjustments, whether that be to scheme, whether that be to personnel, to put you in a position to succeed. I am wondering if center is one of those positions where they don't necessarily have their answer at it just yet. Maybe it is the only question mark you have on that offensive line. And now maybe you're like, we're going to figure out how to address this, whether that's in-house, because you look at a guy like Luke is part of that developmental process, Sarah. I mean, remember, he played tackle one year. He got thrown in the fire at tackle. He got thrown into the fire at guard. I actually thought he did really well at guard when Quinn Miners had that really scary situation pop up in Los Angeles there where, he had the heart episode. That was a little concerning, but Luke Wattenberg, I thought, stepped in and did a really good job at guard. So is it a comfortability thing here for Luke? Is it what can he take from the offseason? Because this is what happens. The coaches get together, position coaches get together, the ones that haven't, gone elsewhere to a promotion or have been let go. but they sit there and they'll highlight what their players did well, what their players didn't do well. And those players will have that feedback going into the offseason as this is an area we need you to emphasize and work on and improve on. I'm very curious to see how they feel about the center position. And maybe we find out at the scouting combine, which is coming up in Indianapolis here in the next month and a half. And we'll obviously have you covered here every step of the way here, Locked On Broncos. But to continue on with this conversation here, should center be upgraded here for the Broncos? We make a look at maybe why they should upgrade it. We look at what that looks like in-house, out of market, whether that's the NFL draft as well. Here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at Prize Picks and the big game. It's almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. And here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where one of the starting quarterbacks only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick and you're cashing out. Check out the promos tab to tell any of the super sweet Millie winners big game lineups. And if you tell a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game.
If the Denver Broncos are going to find an upgrade at center in the 2025 offseason, where the heck is it going to come from? Are they going to go to free agency? We're going to see the NFL draft. Are they even going to mess around with it? Because you know what? That center quarterback exchange, I mean, there is a chemistry involved there. So do you want to add a new guy to the mix? We're going to break that down on today's episode, Locked on Broncos. And hey, Broncos Country, thanks so much for rocking with us through this whole entire season. We get to cover the preseason, the regular season, and the postseason finally for the very first time. And all you everydayers out there, mile high salute to every single one of you. We appreciate you so much. If you're not an everyday listener yet to Locked On Broncos, hit subscribe, get us at the top of your feed, at the top of your algorithm. Do that right now. It really helps out the show. And let's talk about this. Interior offensive line doesn't get a ton of love in the Twitter discussions, Cody, because it's all about the skill players. It's all about the glamour positions, and justifiably so. The Broncos need playmakers. There's no doubt. But in order for Bo Nix to get the ball to the playmakers, you got to have the proper quarterback center exchange. I kind of want to start off this discussion about our question here today. Should center be upgraded? I kind of want to start off the discussion by pointing out that, hey, just so we have a heads up here, Bo Nix already has chemistry with 2 guys at the center position on this roster, and the idea of upgrading the position will require gaining chemistry with somebody new.
Yeah, and that can always be problematic. And look, I think this is where Alex Forsyth, I think, has the advantage over everybody because he has that prior experience being Bo Nix's center in college, where once again, Bo was one of the least sacked quarterbacks in all of the NCAA in his final 2 years at Oregon. I mean, you combine numbers from the both years that he was there at Oregon, the least sacked quarterback in the entire country. That was, a testament to obviously the Ducks offensive line there. Forsyth understood that. And look, I don't think he really had any quarterback center exchange issues. If I'm not mistaken, I think didn't Bo have 1 or 2 QB center exchange issues while under center with Luke Wattenberg? Didn't that come early on in the season?
Seems like it. Yeah.
I don't feel like it was much of an issue later on into the year, but certainly it's those things can disrupt your momentum, so to speak there. So I agree with you, Sayre. And it's like, we can answer this question too. Like, should center be upgraded? Yeah, absolutely. But it also can be upgraded with Luke Wattenberg. It can be upgraded with Alex Forsyth, either or. And what I mean by Wattenberg, if he takes all the feedback that this coaching staff gives him, and let's say he concertedly works towards that this offseason, we won't really know till training camp or even the preseason what that may look like, so to speak. But, he can improve. Like, that's the thing. He's not just going to be the same player if he puts forth the effort into working on those things that he needs to work on. Like, no player in the NFL is going to be the same player unless they don't put in and work, or the personnel or the environment around them isn't sustainable for them to grow or succeed. We've seen that with different positions, but the center position, I think, has to play better in 2025 if Denver's going to have a chance. And look, you got to be able to run the football. Nobody's not saying that, but you also have to, I feel like at times, a lot of the pressure sometimes came from the interior, which if you know this more than anything else, and look, you're also seeing this debate about Josh Allen this week on where he should have thrown the football. And, film analysts are getting picked apart by former NFL QBs, which you kind of like to see sometimes. Inside pressure is the most dangerous threat to a quarterback in the disruption of a play, more so than an outside linebacker beating an offensive tackle, right? Because a quarterback can then dip up underneath. But when you have pressure coming on the interior, you can't step up in the pocket because you're going to step up right into that pressure and you make it easier for the defense. So I feel like at times Wattenberg did struggle with some consistency with getting beat on the interior. Specifically, I'll go back to the Indianapolis Colts game. That was definitely something that we saw early on there. So yeah, it has to be upgraded. The position, the play has to be better, but you can do it in-house versus going out there and looking at the free agency market. And Sayre, I've got the free agents pulled up right here that are going to be available here in terms of UFAs. There really isn't anyone that stands out to me except one guy, right? Ryan Kelly of the Indianapolis Colts is the only name, the only real veteran option that, has an estimated market value, according to our friends over there at SpotTrack. I don't see anybody else on this list necessarily. And I'm like, all right, hey, Denver's got to go out and they got to go get this guy. I'm not seeing it. So your best bet, in my opinion, sticking with who you have and hoping that their development takes a step forward.
Yeah, that could very well be. And we'll see who ends up getting cut and things like that. Another name that I saw, Cody, was James Daniels, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who's been playing guard for them, but he was a center coming out of Iowa back in the day. So shout out to my Hawkeyes. Always seem to work their way into the discussion somehow. But James Daniels could be an option. I think when you look back at Sean Payton's teams in New Orleans, how important was it to have investments basically at every position on the offensive line? I mean, occasionally we would see Sean hit on a steal in the NFL draft, but more often than not, I mean, we're talking about making your primary big investments on upgrading the offensive line. And we saw that with guys like Eric McCoy, Andrew Speed, Ryan Ramczyk. You gave Jari Evans contract back in the day. Obviously, they had Teron Armstead for a long time. They made a trade one time that was one of the biggest blockbuster trades at the time in the NFL when they sent tight end Jimmy Graham to the Seattle Seahawks. And it wasn't just for like a first-round pick or multiple first-round picks. Remember, Sean Payton traded to acquire center Max Unger back in the day. He traded his dude, Jimmy Graham, the Joker. Like, we're talking about the most important.
Hey, that's why Jimmy's mad at him still.
Yeah, I would assume that's probably why that is. So you traded for Max Unger to upgrade your center position. I'm not saying you go make a move like that, like to trade for a guy. Maybe you do, but depending on the cost, obviously. But I want to just highlight that because of how important it is to Sean Payton to have this position locked up and to have, the best of the best that you can at that spot. So maybe Ryan Kelly is the guy, where we talked about, hey, Sean's fired certain coaches. It's like he must have an upgrade in mind to be getting rid of these guys. Maybe that's the similar approach that you take at the center position to say, hey, you already have two guys who started for you last year and who played, relatively well. We're being critical on the show and harsh because you have to be in the offseason when upgrades are potentially available. But man, to upgrade at center would require like a clear and obvious upgrade, which would be somebody like a Ryan Kelly of the Indianapolis Colts, where, by the way, they run the ball real well there in Indianapolis. And so he would be somebody that I would be highly intrigued by, Cody. But at the same time, you can't guarantee that kind of stuff when it comes to free agency. So you would have to have your ducks in a row here when we get to the combine, like you said, in just a handful of weeks.
Well, and I would also argue too, center is not really a need for this team right now. It's not even one of those things you're like, they really have to find a way to go out and address this. I think you and I have been very vocal about it. I think Broncos Country has as well. Tight end, running back, those are probably the more high priority positions on the offensive side of the ball. And honorable mention thrown in there for wide receiver. I mean, when you look at center, it might be fourth or fifth at this point, but not really something that's like pressing for the Broncos to go out there and obviously revamp. Now, look, I think one thing we have seen with Sean Payton, and to your point, he is always looking, if there's an upgrade available that he feels like will give them better play right away that you can plug in and go, he's going to try to take a chance on that if there's an opportunity to do so. I don't think he's reckless in the moves that he makes. Like I would say that's one thing about Sean that I've observed here in my time covering him is that every move he makes, there's some sort of calculation to it. There's a reason behind it. And I know there are some moves that you and I are sitting here like, wait, why is he going to do that? Like, why did they go out and they get Jarrett Stidham in free agency to as their backup quarterback? Is he going to try to compete to start? Like we had those questions when that move initially happened. Then it's like, all right, Sean Payton understands you need a really good backup in today's NFL. And to that point, Jarrett Stidham showed that he could be a good, I mean, he lit up the number one defense in the 49ers one year when he was with the Las Vegas Raiders. So you look at those things like, all right, this is what it could be. And I like that because I think when you make moves from the understanding of, all right, right now on paper, this is what it could be. It makes us better. That's why you take the chance at doing it. And then sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. That's just like the duality of being a coach, is that you have to forecast some of these moves. And ultimately, if you know and you believe it's going to make you better, you have to try to do that, because every year your window, it opens and it closes. Like the Broncos window, for some reason, for the last 10 years has kind of been, it's closed. Okay, wait, it's opening a little bit. It's closed. Oh, they're just a quarterback away in 2019, 2021. Okay, opening a little bit. Okay, it's closed again because they have a legit defense. And now it's like they get to the playoffs. Their window with a rookie quarterback right now, the window is as open as it has ever been for this Broncos team. And so if you can do whatever you can to maximize that time that you have, you do that. Will Sean Payton take that chance? I think is a very, very valuable question here going forward. And speaking of taking chances, the Broncos still dealing with some coaching changes. This time, Sean Payton made a decision to move on from one coach at one position that struggled a little bit towards the end of the season. What do the Broncos have in mind at inside linebacker? We'll break that down and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by friends over there at TurboTax. And this is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with the TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. The fourth quarter action of today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is here, and Denver is making some changes to their coaching staff. While they've had some coaches depart for new job promotions, the Broncos, they fired 2 coaches already as they get ready to revamp the staff here in 2025. Thanks to all the everydayers and first listeners out there in Broncos country for making us part of your day every day, however you choose to do so, because for the true fan, there is never an off season. Sayre, I tell you what, the NFL news cycle, it never ends. There's always something going on. And yesterday we found out that the Denver Broncos, Sean Payton, they parted ways with inside linebacker coach Greg Manusky. And now they're going to be in the market for finding a new inside linebacker coach this upcoming season. I wish that websites like Spot Track and all these other places had like a coaching free agency tracker, right? Which coaches at which positions are available, because that would give us a better idea as to who might the Broncos look at. And I know some names have been thrown out, like I think Pagano. I think John Pagano was a name that was thrown out maybe at one point. We just saw that Chuck Pagano is coming out of retirement to go coach for the Ravens and John Harbaugh over there. So for me, Denver making a move here by firing Greg Manusky, who came in when Sean Payton was on staff here. 2 seasons, right? You get 2 years. Now they're moving on. To me, that kind of tells me that Sean Payton was not pleased with how the linebackers played specifically on the inside, or how it was coached up. And I think it's going to expand to a larger conversation about Vance Joseph.
Yeah, I think, Cody, when you look at this move and you look at kind of the coaches that they've really let go or fired this offseason, I mean, special teams coordinator, I mean, Ben Kotwika, he gets let go after a number of major errors this past season. Let's just put it that way for that unit. And then the tight ends coach, Declan Doyle, he obviously got a huge promotion to go to Chicago, but at the same time, I don't think the Broncos were necessarily upset to see him go, considering the performance at that position in terms of the passing game. And then now inside linebacker, which is another area of weakness for this team. As you and I talked about down the stretch this season on a number of post games, bad communication from the inside linebacker position with the safeties and things like that, especially in coverage, passing guys off. We heard Sean Payton's comment about all the free runners against the Cincinnati Bengals. A lot of that had to do with the linebackers having issues. And so maybe that was the Chargers game, actually, that I'm thinking of, the free runners. But either way, there was too many guys running wide open in both of those games. So, but, you see this and you kind of see, okay, they're taking a hard stance against the areas that really crushed this team at different times this season. Yeah, they made the playoffs, but man, nobody's satisfied with just making the playoffs. Sean Payton is not satisfied with the status quo. And you can see that. Like, people are questioning, why are you firing this coach? Why are you letting this guy go? Why are you letting everybody pluck off your staff? I think he's okay with succession plans in different areas, Cody. And I kind of don't mind the idea of, let's get some fresh eyes, some fresh blood, because it might be perfect timing, because you might be about to overhaul this entire position group in terms of the roster.
I mean, you got 3 guys at this position already that are unrestricted free agents. The only guys you have under contract that are returning: Drew Sanders, Alex Singleton coming off of his ACL injury, and then Lavelle Bailey, who was an undrafted rookie free agent for you last year. Like, this position room really could look entirely different. And if anything, Sayre, I would say right now Drew Sanders might be the only safe bet to return at this point. But to your point, right? And I made a mention about Vance Joseph. What did I mean by that? Well, Broncos country. I understand. Look, there are a lot of Broncos fans. Sayre, no matter how many episodes we put out, a lot of Broncos fans don't want Vance Joseph to come back. And a lot of people are like, well, Vance's defense, it fell off. We talk about, okay, yes, the defense, the Cleveland game, that was the Levi Wallace game. That was Levi Wallace's struggles. And it was also a little bit of the inside linebackers on those crossing patterns. As we've mentioned, that has been a little bit of a problem, and teams started to exploit it. So for Denver to move on from Greg Manusky, like, here's the thing. Vance Joseph oversees calling the defense. You have position coaches who are responsible for coaching up those players and making sure when there is a call that those players understand their assignment. Everything gets put on Vance Joseph. And of course, Vance, for some of the defensive struggles, has his share of blame to handle, right? But it's also on those position coaches when that unit in particular is struggling the most. And it's the little things, Sayre. It's like the linebacker blitzing into the wrong gap, or blitzing into where, you have a defensive lineman where he's supposed to go. So now you got 2 guys in the same spot, which then opens up a hole for a runner to run through, or it just allows you to easily just crash those guys down in pass protection. Those are those things that we are talking about here. And from the looks of it, with them making a move from getting rid of Greg Manusky, they're going to be looking into bringing a coach who can teach this position to be a little bit more disciplined. And look, at linebacker, you're going to think a lot, because you have to read the guard. Is it run? Is it pass? Okay, it's run. I got to fill. I got to get into my run fits. Oh, it's pass. I got to drop. I got to locate. Okay, if we're in man coverage, I got to tell back if he's to my side or if he comes to my side. Oh, it's zone. I got to get back to my drop. If it is a pass, where is my zone dropping to? And like, coverage calls, they change depending on if there's a motion or there's a certain check. Like, it is a position where those guys have to think a million miles an hour. And so for your position coach, you have to teach these guys, and you have to be in a spot where, okay, we're not going to overload them with too much information. We're going to simplify it, but we're going to also allow them to play as loose and free as possible. I mean, that's why guys like Fred Warner, Matt Milano, they play with their hair on fire, man, because they don't have to think too much. They understand the assignment and they go and they react to it. And so much of it is that continuity, because you and I have talked about this how many times. You have 10 players doing their job. One player doesn't do their job. It impacts the whole entire operation. That's what happened from time to time. And apparently for Sean Payton, it is the inside linebacker position, which now makes me ask the question, with the struggles that we saw in obviously the Broncos run game, could the Broncos make a change from Lou Ainey?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. The running backs coach, I mean, that would be the next domino that I would expect to fall potentially in terms of this. And maybe even, honestly, maybe even wide receiver with Kerry Colbert. I mean, I don't think anything should be necessarily off the table at this point, Cody, although you don't want to necessarily just fire everybody and say, look, you guys underachieved this year. I mean, but I mean, it's worth speculating. And I can't help but wonder at the inside linebacker position. This is just a theory. This is not, I'm not trying to make a false equivalence here or anything like that. But here's my theory. If the Broncos and Sean Payton bring in a young coach who's maybe even never been a position coach in the NFL before, maybe it's another former player hiring. Let's say they make that kind of a move. Like I've seen it thrown out there, Rob Ninkovich. I can't remember who first said that, but I know Sean Payton talks about him all the time. But if it's somebody like
linebacker coach,
linebacker coach, exactly. I mean, hey, if it's somebody like that, I could see the Broncos then going into free agency and saying, hey, we're bringing in a first-time position coach. We want to bring in some more veteran guys to play at the position and have him coach them up, as opposed to saying, hey, we're going to bring in a young coach with young players at the same time, because it's going to be so critical for this defense to carry over its success and build upon that next year, as opposed to saying, hey, we're willing to kind of take a step back here and take our lumps with some young guys. Not saying the Broncos wouldn't do that, but I'm gonna make a guess here that if the Broncos bring in a first-time position coach at linebackers coach specifically, and especially a former player, then I think they go to free agency and they make some investments in guys. If they bring in another veteran coach, a guy who's been around the block, maybe a guy who worked with Sean Payton in New Orleans or something like that, if it's a more experienced guy, I think maybe they try to go with the young player route at the position. So let's just kind of see what materializes there. But that's kind of my theory that I've got at this point in time.
Well, Broncos Country, it sets everything up perfectly for tomorrow's episode of the show, because we're going to be switching to the defensive side of the ball now that we've gone through every offensive position possible in terms of recap, biggest question, and what they can do to answer that question going forward. Inside linebacker is where we're going to take a look. We're going to look at the performance in 2024. We're going to ask the biggest question, which you got a little bit of a teaser here. Who's going to be the new coach? What is that room going to look like? How do they answer it? We'll take a look at some free agent options that are available, and also maybe even the NFL draft. We'll break all that down and much more for all you everydayers out there in Broncos country on tomorrow's episode of the show.